think it's very timely actually to put this topic on the need for reviving the China-Europe think tank exchange. It is indeed almost vital at this point to revive those relationships. And I think we certainly all agree that during those last 2 or 3 years, because of the lack of direct interaction, but also for many other reasons, the relationship between Europe and China have somewhat deteriorated for good or for bad reasons, but they have actually badly deteriorated, mostly for political reasons, and I don't want to go into too much details, but of course we all have in mind, from the European perspective, the way the COVID management, the mask diplomacy, human rights issues, China support, or somewhat some support for Russia. And I think this has created some sort of frustration among Europeans. And even so, the economic relations have remained very close and very strong. In 2020, I think China became the EU largest trading partners for goods for the first time, surpassing the US. Still very good, and there is certainly a need to revitalize, and reinvent the relationship between Europe and China. There is 2 interesting studies that just came out. One from the European Parliament Research Service that published a study. It's a survey made with the 200 most prominent think tanks and research centers in Europe that's working on a relationship with China, and which have defined the priorities areas for the common decade. And I think we can find some interesting element there. For instance, the topic for cooperation for climate and sustainability has been identified as one of the priority areas, but also reducing supply chain dependencies and protecting intellectual property. There is also a very interesting study that was published just 2 months ago by the German Marshall Fund, which is the transatlantic trends, which shows that actually there is still, among the public in Europe, a great openness for engagement with China. So I think the situation is quite contrasted. The door is still open, but in a way, and that would be my last comment, but which is the main, let's say, political focus, is that we are in a way at a pivotal point. I think we need, particularly in the perspective of the end, hopefully, touching wood, in the next few months of the conflict in Ukraine, there can be an acceleration in one way or another. In the remaking of the world order and the coalition and the structure of the world. And I think this is a very important moment where Europeans can still move on one side or the other. There will be a very strong pressure, particularly from the United States, for eventually re-accelerating, revitalizing the tension between the West and China. Europe is certainly not very keen for going that way. Europeans still have in mind that in 2 years' time, there will be general election in the United States, and that everything can change again. There is today a very strong focus on the transatlantic coalition, but it can change very rapidly. And also, I think, there is still a very strong sort of trauma here in Europe, remembering a divide of the world. I don't think that Europeans are keen and willing to re-establish a Cold War or a divide of the world in two camps. I think there is a very strong awareness, a very strong willingness to build or to rebuild, to reinvent a multilateral system, and I think this is why it is extremely important at this point in time to revitalize the relationship between Europe and China with, in a way, no compromise, in a very frank and a very open way. I think it's also very important to understand that, and this is one of the key messages that emerged from this survey that I just mentioned before, is that Europeans are very keen to have the EU as an entity also being the counterpart for the discussion with China, instead of having some sort of a China one-on-one relation with countries in Europe. I think this is quite important that China acknowledge and understand that Europeans are very keen to speak with one voice, even so it is not easy. And we have seen even lately some issues about that. But I think it is also up to the Europeans, to speak with one voice. But in a way, my message is to say the situation is open, and we are, in a way, at a pivotal point, and we should not miss this opportunity to re-engage and to build or to rebuild trust and mutual engagement.